talking Warrior Queen from 1987, also known as Pompeii. Now, this is a kind of a movie that often gets lumped in with the kind of the sword and sorcery movies of the 80s. Movies like Deathstalker, Amazon's Barbarian Queen. This movie isn't really like that. A lot of those movies were produced by Roger Corman. This one is actually an Italian production, actually produced or co-produced by Joe D'Amato, and is actually not really an action movie at all. It's a Roman drama, if anything, and more kind of about sex orgies than anything else. It's actually directed by Chuck Vincent, who until this point had mostly directed porn movies. So I think because of the cover and the kind of the poster art for this, it kind of gets lumped in with those Deathstalker style movies. Now, it does actually star Rick Hill, who was one of the Deathstalkers, admittedly, but you know, it isn't really like those movies at all. So anyway, yeah, Warrior Queen. This one stars Sybil and as I've mentioned, you've got Rick Hill, and you've also got Donald Pleasence in there. So you've got a couple of recognisable faces. And it takes place in Pompeii, kind of just before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. And the movie is about various kind of people within this kind of Roman province. And they kind of, we've got a couple of slaves. We've got Sybil Danning's character, who is someone high up in Roman aristocracy. You know, we've got a few kind of gladiators. We've got you know, a couple of other people as well, and it's kind of they're going about their lives effectively until the end of the movie, where we get the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. So the movie, I have to be honest with you, isn't actually about very much, because there's no real through storyline in this movie. You get a few little kind of like day in the life of various different characters, but there's not a strong narrative in this movie at all. But we'll come back on to that. Let's talk about what does work. Now, this being a kind of an 80s movie, you know, a lower budget movie, and about the Roman Empire, it's nice that it's actually made in Italy, I guess. And despite its budget, I will say that I kind of still quite like some of the production here. It's clearly not a massive production, but we do get a, you know, use of that kind of environment in Italy. We do get a kind of quite a lot of good costumes in the background and things like this, and we do get a reasonable amount of kind of extras kind of walking around. Yes, I know they use stock footage in some of the sequences, but even when it's not, I do think that there is this kind of like you know, we have quite a lot kind of going on in this movie, despite it being not a huge budgeted movie. And, you know, this particular film, and the fact that it's obviously directed by Chuck Vincent, I guess it's more about the kind of like the hedonistic nature of the kind of the Roman Empire, because boy, there's a lot of flesh on display in this movie. I know there is a cut version, but if you watch the full version, it is almost like a softcore porn in some respects. I guess you could say Caligula was kind of like that, to be fair as well, but, you know, there's a lot going on in regards to the kind of flesh. We get a little bit of gladiators, we get a little bit of kind of like drama between different slaves and such, and so it's kind of like different facets of people's lives within this kind of the Roman Empire at this time in this place. So in some ways, despite the movie really being very kind of vague in regards to any type of actual kind of plot, it's almost just like little snippets of people and their lives at this time before this kind of big natural kind of disaster. The acting is, you know, a mixed bag, I guess. I quite like Donald Pleasence in this role as this kind of like somewhat bureaucratic kind of character. Yeah. There you go. It's, to be honest with you, this movie isn't fantastic. I mean, I'm not going to lie. The main issue, as I've kind of already alluded to here, this movie is so directionless. I mean, if you were to say what's the plot of this movie, you'd be hard pressed to kind of describe one. You have various like mini plots, I suppose, like even the fact this movie is called, for the most part in most territories, Warrior Queen, that I'm assuming is referring to Sybil's Downing character. She really isn't like a warrior queen at all. There's barely any kind of like action sequences within the movie. She gets a couple of small ones, but her part is so ill-defined. I mean, she's just kind of like this dignitary from Rome coming to Pompeii, and everyone's kind of like, oh god, you know, she's here, kind of like, look our best and stuff. But she just looks like bored. There's a little bit of kind of like idea here that she kind of sympathises with the slaves, but it's so underdeveloped. I mean, that should have been the through line to the story. It's just kind of like a little bit, but it's not developed at all. Sybil Downing has barely any lines in this movie. The movie doesn't really have a main character, I suppose. Like, we get this female slave who is this virgin and who's kind of this prized possession. And then we get Rick Hill's kind of like gladiator / chariot rider, who I guess is our male lead. But even them, they're not fully fleshed out at all. It's very kind of like loose kind of stories. We get, you know, Rick Hill's got this rival kind of gladiator, and you know, the slave girl has got, you know, how she's dealing with the other kind of slaves, and there's kind of like the fact that she's like this object of desire and she's getting jealous from the kind of the Roman women, things like that. So admittedly there's a lot going on in this movie, but it's so unfocused. I mean, Sybil Downing, I'm quite the fan of Sybil Downing. I really enjoyed her in Battle Beyond the Stars. I kind of liked her in Howling 2 and various other products, but she looks bored in this movie. Now, I suspect that was the way she was directed, but, you know, I mean, have a drinking game how many times a female member of the cast rolls their eyes in this movie. Despite it being, obviously, as I've mentioned, somewhat impressive in regards to its production, despite it being a low-budget movie, the budget does show. The action's poorly handled. There's not a lot of action actually in it, as I've mentioned, and some of the action sequences just seem like completely superfluous just to have an action sequence. Our opening scene where Sybil Downing's character was attacked by bandits, they just seem to come out of nowhere for no reason. There's very little guards with her, and they just let us get on like a pack of cards. It's just not very well done. The Gladiator games, I suppose, I mean, at least they have something different in regards to the games. But it's very, very obvious when they use stock footage in this movie as well, because it looks like vastly different quality. And they've used footage from an older film as well to kind of obviously show a kind of a sense of scale. But we do see those budget restraints, for example, when we do have our actual footage for this movie. For example, in the kind of the games, like you'll just see like one kind of like grouping of people, and that's like the movie. They've got the crowds of people, and it's obviously that's, you know, you look past that and there'll be no one there. So it kind of does portray some of the kind of the budgetary issues. As I say, this is an Italian production. Some of the kind of the acting is a little ropey, but there's not a lot of dialogue in it, if we're being honest. So it's kind of like not a particularly interesting movie for the most part of this film, until we get to the Mount Vesuvius section of it. It's just people milling around, kind of like doing their thing. It's like, what is this movie actually about? So, despite I think it having the potential, I think, to at least be, I mean, like I say, I think if you look at the kind of the set decoration and the costumes, they could have had an interesting film here, because they've got the parts to make one, but the script and the direction is so poor. There's just nothing to this movie. So for me, it's a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.